Hey everyone, welcome back to Conviction Bet. Hope you're doing well. It's the middle of July. Second quarter earnings season just kicked off this week. The big banks reporting alongside the latest inflation print, and the whole market is holding its breath over one question. Analysts have penciled in almost 24% earnings growth for the quarter one of the strongest setups heading into a reporting season since 2021. Strip out technology, and that number falls to 12. After a jittery June, that is a lot of weight resting on a very small number of names. And speaking of bets that everyone's watching, while the important stuff happens quietly in the background, the four biggest tech companies are planning as much as $725 billion of capital spending this year, much of it tied to AI infrastructure, building a machine that never has to sleep. And the one thing Wall Street will not do while it waits to see if that works is get 8 hours itself. We'll build a brain that runs 24/7. We just refuse to let ours power down for a third of the night. But here's what actually matters, and it isn't on the tape. $725 billion of capital spending, up 77% in a single year. A market priced for perfection. In an earnings season where half the growth vanishes if you take technology out of it, and the biggest contributor inside technology is the chip companies selling the build-out. All of it loud, all of it visible, all of it moving by the minute. The market is telling a story about whether one enormous, concentrated, capital-intensive bet is going to compound. I want to tell a different story about three much smaller bets that are quietly compounding or quietly decaying inside every single one of us, whether we're paying attention or not. I'm J.L. Maurer, and this is Conviction Bet. We believe the stories that move your portfolio are usually quieter than the ones that move the tape. Here's where we're going. I'm going to make the case that the most important assets you will ever manage are not in your brokerage account, and that as an investor, you already own the exact mental toolkit needed to manage them. You're just not pointing it at them. 3 accounts: cash, muscle, sleep. And by the end, I want you sitting with something genuinely uncomfortable. That with at least one of these three, you cannot even tell how badly you're doing because your sense of how bad it is doesn't keep pace with how bad it actually is. Let me start with the frame, because the frame is the whole episode. If you want to know whether someone's life is going to go well over a 30-year horizon, you can ask a lot of questions. Most of the obvious answers, their job title, their income, their house, how they look in a photo, turn out to be results, outputs, proxies for something more fundamental, sitting underneath. What I want is the thing underneath, the foundation, the stuff you feel absolutely nothing about when it's fine, and that takes the whole structure down when it cracks. And when I run that filter, I keep landing on the same three things: cash flow, muscle, sleep. Now, here's why I picked those three and not, say, relationships or purpose, which matter enormously, but which I can't measure. These three you can measure, you can put a number on them, you can literally manage them like accounts. And that's the metaphor I want you to carry through the whole episode. You are keeping 3 ledgers, whether you know it or not: a cash account, a body account, a sleep account. And here's the thing, an investor should notice immediately. They are not the same kind of asset. And pretending they are is exactly where advice like this usually goes wrong. Start with the one you know. Money flows through your life, earnings in, spending out. What those flows leave behind is the stock, your wealth. And wealth compounds. Left alone and sensibly invested, it generates more of itself. That is the only one of these three that does. Muscle doesn't compound. Muscle depreciates. Training is the flow, capacity is the reserve it builds, and that reserve leaks, stop maintaining it, and it degrades, and the degradation speeds up with age. It's a capital asset with an upkeep bill, and sleep isn't an asset at all. Sleep is the maintenance capex. It's the recurring spend that keeps the other two serviceable. And like every maintenance budget in corporate history, you can defer it. You'll look absolutely fine for a while. And the asset base rots quietly underneath you. So one thing that compounds, one that depreciates, and the upkeep that decides how fast What they share is the part that actually matters. Today's inputs set tomorrow's capacity, and most of what matters here pays out on a delay. Some of it you'll feel tomorrow morning. Most of it takes weeks or years, which means the person who manages them well is the person who's comfortable being patient with a system that isn't showing results yet. And if you're a long-term investor, that is your entire edge. That's the muscle you've already built. The so what of this whole episode is just point that discipline at the 3 accounts that aren't in your brokerage. So let's open the first ledger, the cash account. Here's the mental model I find most useful, and it's one a lot of thoughtful people in personal finance land on independently. Picture your financial life as a reservoir with pipes running in and pipes running out. On the inflow side, the biggest pipe for most people is what we can call human capital, your ability to earn your salary, your side income, the money you make by being able to get up and work. A steady paycheck is a lot like a long-dated bond, slow growing, and it pays out over decades. Except this particular bond has an issuer who can default without warning a layoff, an illness, an industry that stops needing you, and its duration gets shorter every single year. Then there's a second, usually smaller inflow pipe, the income thrown off by your financial assets, dividends, interest, rent, money that shows up whether or not you get out of bed. And then there's the outflow side. And the outflow side has way more pipes than you'd like. Necessary spending, optional spending, the kids, if you have them, your parents as they age, and your own retirement eventually. And here's the quiet, brutal arithmetic of middle age. The inflow pipes, the ones that depend on you being able to work, eventually plateau or just get less secure. When that happens, varies enormously, depending on what you do for a living. That it happens doesn't. Meanwhile, the outflow pipes just keep multiplying. The dread that so many people feel in their 40s isn't really about money in the abstract. It's the specific sensation of watching the pressure drop on the pipes you control by working, while the pipes draining the reservoir keep getting added. Now, there's a modern accelerant on the outflow side that I think is genuinely underrated, and it has a name: subscriptions. Not the Netflix is $11 kind of trivial. I mean, the structural shift of your spending into recurring, automatic, hard to cancel commitments. There's a subscription software company called Zuora, private now, taken over by Silver Lake, that publishes an index tracking the subscription economy. Base level of 100 at the start of 2012. By early 2021, that index had climbed to 437. It more than quadrupled in under a decade. Over that stretch, subscription businesses grew their revenue several times faster than the broad market. Now, that index is built from Zuora's own customers, and Zuora sells subscription billing software, so treat it exactly the way you treat any vendor's chart. But the direction isn't in dispute. And Wall Street loves this, by the way, for a completely rational reason. If a company collects its revenue as recurring subscriptions, next year's results look a lot like this year's. That predictability is worth a premium. A subscription is a beautiful asset if you're the one collecting it. But flip it around to the household. Every one of those elegant recurring revenue businesses is, from your side of the ledger, an automatic withdrawal that quietly attached itself to your bank account like a barnacle. And most people genuinely do not know how many they're carrying. Here's my one piece of homework for this whole episode. Open your bank statements or your app store and read every recurring charge line by line. I'd bet money you find at least one you forgot you were paying for, because that's the design. The withdrawal is painless on purpose. And to be fair, not every subscription is a trap. Plenty are just a convenient way to keep buying something you genuinely use. But recurring billing runs on inertia by construction. A small automatic charge is far easier to overlook than a deliberate purchase, and you never feel the individual cuts. And notice what's coming next. The newest recurring line item on my own statement, and maybe yours, is AI. The $20 a month, then the $100 a month, that quietly becomes permanent. We are, all of us, slowly turning our own budgets into subscriptions. Now, here's the part that actually matters for building wealth, and it's the least intuitive part. The whole game is converting the surplus from your human capital pipe into equity in your financial asset pipe. turning your ability to earn, which is temporary, into ownership of assets that compound, which isn't. And the hinge of that conversion is savings. Now, on the surface, savings equals income minus spending. Simple. But the truer version is savings equals income minus your lifestyle. A high income does not equal a high surplus. This is the entire unglamorous secret of every American personal finance bestseller ever written. And they all say the same two things: spend less than you earn and buy and hold a low-cost index fund. That's it. That's the library. And the reason that advice is so boring and so powerful is that your lifestyle is the one variable on the whole board you actually control. You can't control the market. You can absolutely control whether your spending rises to meet every raise. Your savings rate is far more within your reach than your income ever will be. So here's the so what on the cash account. And it's a reframe of what retirement even means. Salary alone does not determine your retirement. The biggest lever you actually control is how much of that income you convert consistently into assets whose cash flows compound faster than your own earning power decays. Here in the US, a man who actually makes it to 65 can expect roughly another 18 years. A woman, closer to 21. That is not a short epilogue. That's 2 decades you have to fund, and those are averages. So plenty of people go well past them. The real goal of the cash account isn't a big number. It's a specific kind of freedom. Waking up one morning in your 60s and not being forced to sell your time just to survive. Financial health is what buys you a healthy retirement mindset. And that freedom, the ability to own your own time, is a currency that trades against actual dollars at an absurdly favorable exchange rate. That first account is the one most of you have thought hardest about. The next two, I'd guess you've thought about far less, and they may matter more. Let's open the second ledger, the muscle account. And I need to be precise about what I mean, because I do not mean what you think I mean. I'm not talking about the muscle you see in a mirror, not the aesthetics, not the abs, not the shoulders, not how you look at the beach. I'm talking about your total skeletal muscle as a system, as essentially an organ. A piece of physical infrastructure, your body's strategic reserve of force. And here's the reframe that makes an investor sit up. There's a well-known book in the longevity world. It's called Outlive, and it puts this in language a saver will recognize instantly. Strength training, it says, is a form of retirement saving. And once you hear it that way, you genuinely cannot unhear it. Here's the mechanism. Starting somewhere around age 40, you begin losing muscle quietly. It's called sarcopenia from the Greek for roughly poverty of the flesh. And here I want to be careful because the numbers you will hear quoted on this are usually too big. You'll hear 1 to 2% a year after 50. That figure gets repeated everywhere, and the peer-reviewed reviews specifically flag it as misattributed. Measured properly, the same people. Tracked over years, the loss usually runs under 1% a year in older adults. And it varies enormously by sex, by activity, by illness, which sounds survivable. Beat until you look at strength. Because strength does not decay at the same rate as size. It decays faster. When researchers measure both in the same people, strength drains 2 to 5 times faster than mass. By 75, men are losing 3 to 4% of their strength every single year. That's the number that matters. And that's the moment everyone eventually has it where you go to stand up and you reach for something to hold. Or you have to switch hands carrying the groceries. That's the account statement arriving. And why does this rise to the level of life and death? There's a study that answers that so cleanly, it's almost unfair. 2,292 Americans in their 70s. Researchers measured their quadriceps strength, measured their grip, and then measured their actual muscle by CT scan and DXA. So real tissue, not an estimate off a bathroom scale. Then they followed them for 5 years and counted who was still alive. Strength predicted it powerfully. Muscle size didn't. And when they controlled for muscle mass, the strength signal barely moved. The paper is called, and I want you to hear the title, because the researchers did not bury the lead. Strength, but not muscle mass, is associated with mortality. Same people, same study, same day in the lab. The force predicted who died. The tissue didn't. Think about what strength training is actually buying you decades early. It's buying the ability to get off the floor without help at 80, to carry your own bag through an airport, to catch yourself when you slip in the bathroom instead of going down and breaking a hip and an elderly fracture is genuinely one of the scariest events in medicine because the bed rest that follows accelerates the very muscle loss that put you there. And here's where the account metaphor earns its keep and where I have to be careful with it. Physical capacity has a time value. Starting earlier gives you more years to build the reserve and more years of rehearsing the movements that hold onto it. But unlike money, it does not compound. It does not quietly make more of itself while you're not looking. And it leaks through detraining, through illness, through one bad year on the couch, which is precisely why it's the account that needs the upkeep. But here's the part I had wrong in my own head until I looked it up. The account never closes. In one study, 12 months of resistance training in men around 70 increased their calf muscle volume by 12% and their torque by 20. One study, not a promise. But in their 70s, starting early gives you more years to build. Starting late still works. Every set you do in your 40s is a deposit into the account. 80-year-old you has to live on, and every set you do at 70 is too. Now, two quick practical things, because I don't want to just moralize. The first is the growth mechanism, and it has a name too, progressive overload. Muscle is lazy and it's smart. If the load is within what it can already handle, it will not spend the energy to grow. It only adapts when you push a little past what it can comfortably handle, when the mechanical tension is high enough that the muscle reads it as a message. And while we're here, the old story about micro tears that you damage the fibers and they repair back bigger is out of date. You don't need to damage the muscle. You need to load it. Enough damage actually gets in the way. Progressive just means you nudge the load up over time. A little heavier this week than last, you keep giving the muscle a reason to grow. The second thing is the raw material, protein. And here, the popular story is wrong in a genuinely interesting way. You've heard that most people don't eat enough protein. On the official numbers, that's just false. Average American intake sits comfortably above the basic requirement, even in the 70s. Though a meaningful minority of older adults do fall short, and older women most of all. But for most people, the problem isn't that you're missing the target. The problem is that the target might be in the wrong place. The basic allowance is about 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight. If you're training and you want to build, the research puts the useful range closer to 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilo, roughly double the allowance. And across the studies, the average extra benefit tends to level off somewhere around 1.6, which is a finding about averages, not a wall your body hits. Older adults are the interesting case. As you age, your muscles get what's called anabolically resistant. They respond less to each gram, so an older person needs a bigger dose per meal to trigger the same repair a younger person gets for free. Which is a cruel bit of design because appetite shrinks with age, and older people often drift toward lighter, meat-avoiding meals exactly when their muscles need the opposite. And one caveat I'm not going to skip because I suspect some of you are listening to this thinking about a parent. Kidney disease changes the math, and which way it changes depends on the stage and on the treatment. Some people are told to restrict protein. People on dialysis are frequently told to eat more of it. That is a real conversation with a real doctor about a real person. It is not a podcast. And muscle isn't only about force. It's also one of your most important metabolic buffers. When you eat carbohydrates, your body stores the energy as glycogen, and about 80% of that glycogen is warehoused in your muscles. All told, you can hold something like 2,000 calories of it, enough to fuel a couple of hours of hard endurance work. So your skeletal muscle is one of the main places blood sugar goes to get dealt with. Now, simply owning more muscle doesn't automatically hand you good insulin sensitivity. Activity, body fat, diet, and genetics all get a vote. But keeping muscle and keeping it working is one of the better levers you have on glucose regulation. Your muscles are, in a real sense, a shock absorber for what you eat. Now, let me steel man the eye roll. because I know some of you are doing it. This is just fitness influencer stuff. And look, the loudest corner of the longevity world has earned a lot of that skepticism. There's a well-known biohacker who runs a whole regimen of dozens of pills a day and, at one point, was doing blood plasma transfusions involving his own teenage son. Dryly, that is not a role model. That's a cautionary tale. Chasing a perfect number on every biomarker, treating your body as an optimization problem to be hacked, I find that just as distorted as vanity about your abs. But notice, none of the actual claims I just made depend on any of those people. They rest on boring, replicated fundamentals, mortality data, sarcopenia rates, protein metabolism. So here's the so what on the muscle account. The muscle you build in your 40s is a reserve that 80-year-old you draws down to stay independent. It has a time value, exactly like money. And the single best day to start funding it was years ago. The second best day is today. Which brings us to the third ledger. And I've saved it for last on purpose, because I think it's the most important of the three. The sleep account. Here's why it outranks the other two. Miss one meal and you're fine. Miss one workout and the cost is slow and forgiving. But one bad night of sleep hits you immediately the next morning in both your body and your mind. And the sleep account has one property that makes it genuinely unique among the three. It's the upkeep, and the upkeep is due every single night. You top it up, you spend it the next day, and if you underfunded last night, today you're simply overdrawn. Now you can recover some of what you lose. That's real. And anyone who tells you sleep debt is permanent and unrecoverable is overselling it. A long weekend genuinely helps, but it's partial recovery, not a full refund. Catch-up sleep buys back part of the deficit, not all of it, and it doesn't reliably erase what repeated short nights have already done, which makes it the one account you cannot run on quarterly settlements. It wants to be paid every night. And the bill for being overdrawn is longer and scarier than people realize. Let me lay out the harms, because the specificity matters. Start with cognition. There's a landmark experiment from 2003. Researchers limited healthy adults to 6 hours in bed, which means they actually slept less than that for 14 straight nights and measured their attention every single day. By the end, their lapses had piled up to the level you'd see in someone who had gone up to 2 entire nights without sleep. Not one night, 2, on 6 hours in bed, which a great many people listening to this would describe as a normal week. And there's a study out of Australia that put a different kind of number on it. On a hand-eye coordination task, 17 hours awake had people performing like someone at 0.05 blood alcohol. 24 hours awake, and it was 0.10 over the legal limit in every state. That's one specific task, not a claim that tiredness and drunkenness are the same thing, but it's a calibration. And here is the single most unsettling part, so I want to say it slowly, carefully. The people in that 14-night experiment did notice they were tired. What they did not notice was how much worse they had got. Their sense of their own sleepiness rose gently. Their actual performance fell off a cliff. The two lines came apart, and the gap between them is the entire problem. You feel basically fine. You are not fine. Your sense of how bad you are does not keep pace with how bad you actually are. If you make your living with your judgment, if you do content or investing, or you sit in meetings making calls that matter, that should genuinely scare you. Keep going. Metabolically, in one controlled study, healthy young men had their sleep cut to 5 hours a night for a single week. Their insulin sensitivity dropped somewhere between 11 and 20%, depending on which measure you use. In 1 week, zoom out. And a meta-analysis pooling more than 100,000 people put the increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes for people chronically sleeping 5 or 6 hours at around 28%. Then there's your brain's cleaning crew. Your brain has a waste clearance system, the glymphatic system, described by a researcher named Deferred at the University of Rochester. The dramatic version of this, the space between your brain cells opening up during deep sleep, fluid flushing the day's metabolic garbage out, comes largely from mice, and I'd rather tell you that than let you think it's settled in humans. But it isn't only mice anymore. A trial published this year ran 39 people through a randomized crossover and found that a normal night's sleep cleared more beta amyloid and tau into the bloodstream than sleep deprivation did. Those are the proteins that accumulate in Alzheimer's. What nobody can tell you yet is how strongly one bad night connects to a disease that shows up 40 years later. The mechanism is real. The dose-response curve is still being drawn. And I'm not going to sell you the scarier version on cancer. The World Health Organization's Cancer Agency classifies night shift work, the kind that scrambles your body clock, as probably carcinogenic to humans. And here's the part that gets misreported constantly. That classification is a statement about how strong the evidence is. It is not a statement about how big the risk is. It's the same category as red meat, which tells you the evidence is comparable and tells you precisely nothing about whether the danger is. And on the heart, there's a natural experiment I want to tell you about, mostly because of what it taught me about my own reasoning. Twice a year, the clocks change. In the spring, we all lose an hour. Several studies find heart attacks tick up in the days afterward, modestly in the pooled analyses, and by as much as 27% in one American study. Though I'll be straight with you, some newer, larger registries find nothing at all. So call it suggestive, not settled. And in the autumn, when we get the hour back, no mirror image, no reliable drop. Now, when I first read that, I thought I had my punchline. Losing the hour costs you. Gaining it back doesn't refund you. There's your sleep account, wrapped in a bow. Except that isn't what it shows. And I want to walk you back from it, because reaching for that conclusion is exactly the move this entire episode is supposed to be against. Spring and autumn are not opposite versions of the same experiment. The light shifts differently. The clock moves in the other direction. And most people don't actually sleep the extra hour in the autumn. They stay up and spend it. Two different interventions, not a withdrawal and a repayment. What the asymmetry does tell you is narrower and still worth something. Your sleep and your body clock do not behave like a balanced ledger. The arithmetic doesn't net out just because the hours do. That's a smaller claim than the one I wanted. It's the one the evidence actually supports. Now, let me connect this back to the last account, because they're linked in a way that's almost poetic. Remember the muscle you're working so hard to build? It doesn't actually grow in the gym, it grows while you sleep. Deep sleep is when your body releases the bulk of its growth hormone, the key repair signal. Sleep after exertion is when the body restocks its glycogen and does the repair work. So if you're chronically short on sleep, your recovery is worse, and some of the adaptation you're training for gets blunted. One bad night doesn't erase a workout, but a bad month makes the work count for less than it should. Which leads somewhere I find weirdly liberating. An aggressive crash diet sacrifices lean tissue along with the fat. How much depends on how steep the deficit is, how much protein you're eating, and whether you're lifting at all. Which means the boring version wins. A slower deficit, enough protein, resistance training, and actual sleep do those, and the weight you lose is mostly fat. Skip them, and you're paying for today's 2 pounds out of your 80-year-old's account. So sleep is one of the highest leverage things you can do for your body and brain. Which raises the obvious question, how do you actually get it? And here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because the answer is completely counterintuitive. I want to borrow a lens from an old idea. Back in 1948, an MIT mathematician named Norbert Wiener coined a term, cybernetics, the science of control and feedback, how you steer a system you can't just issue orders to. And if you look at sleep through that lens, you hit a wall immediately, and it's a strange one. Sleep is not directly controllable. You cannot command yourself to fall asleep. In fact, the harder you try, the more the pressure of trying keeps you awake. Sleep is what an engineer would call an input controllable, output uncontrollable system. You can't touch the output. You can only touch the input, everything surrounding the sleep, and then let it happen. So the entire correct strategy is not try harder to sleep. It's optimize every input and then get out of the way. So what are the inputs? They fall into two buckets, regularity and quality. Regularity first, the goal being to stabilize your body clock. And the clock has a deeply counterintuitive feature. The lever isn't your bedtime. Light is what actually sets the clock. It is far and away the strongest signal your body gets. And a fixed wake time does two jobs. It's the thing that reliably delivers you that morning light, and it anchors everything else when you eat, when you move, when the pressure to sleep starts building again. So if you want to sleep earlier, you don't start with bedtime. You start by getting up at the same time and getting outside. And I do mean outside. A bright indoor room is dimmer than an overcast morning by a factor most people would flatly refuse to believe. Curtains open, out the door, and give it real minutes, not one. Second input, your caffeine cutoff. Caffeine's half-life averages around 5 hours, but how fast you clear it is substantially genetic, and the spread between people is enormous. On average, a coffee at 2 in the afternoon still has a quarter of its punch circulating at midnight, fighting you. And even when you do fall asleep, caffeine quietly degrades the quality of your deep sleep. The conventional advice is to stop at noon. If you're one of the slow clearers earlier, the honest version is leave far more hours before bed than feels necessary. Third input, and this one stings the weekend. Sleeping in and staying up late on Friday and Saturday feels like a reward, but to your body clock, you've just flown yourself across 2 time zones and back every single week. That Monday morning fog isn't only social. Part of it is genuine, self-inflicted jet lag. So the rough convention is to keep weekend timing within about an hour of your weekday timing. That's a rule of thumb, not a biological cliff. And if you're genuinely short on sleep, get the sleep. Total hours first, timing second. Now the second bucket, quality. And this is about making the bedroom match your body's actual physiology. And it comes down to one beautiful mechanism that ties this whole account together. As you fall asleep, your core body temperature drops by about 1 degree Celsius, call it 2 Fahrenheit. Your body dumps that heat out through your hands and feet to pull it off, which is why a cool bedroom helps. The figure you'll see quoted is around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, about 18 Celsius, and Walker calls that about right for most people. Bedding and preference will move it, but if the room is too warm, that drop is harder to achieve, and the sleep you get is shallower. Here's my favorite counterintuitive trick that falls right out of this. A warm bath before bed helps you sleep, but not because it warms you up. It's the opposite. The hot water pulls blood to the surface of your skin, and when you get out, all that dilated plumbing radiates your core heat away fast. Your core cools quicker, and you drop off quicker. The other quality inputs are simpler. Darkness as close to total as you can get. Your eyelids block a lot of light, but not all of it. And what gets through to your eyes suppresses the melatonin that's trying to make you drowsy. Blackout curtains or an eye mask and blue light the phone, the laptop. In the experiment, everyone cites people read on tablets for several hours a night across several nights, and it suppressed their melatonin by more than half and pushed their body clock later. That's a heavier dose than most of us are actually getting, so don't overread it. But the direction is clear enough. Bright, close-up screens late at night delay the signal that's trying to make you sleepy. Dim them or put them down. Read a book, stare at a wall. And the last one people get exactly wrong, alcohol. A nightcap gets you unconscious faster. That is not the same as getting you to sleep. Especially in larger amounts and especially close to bedtime, it fragments the back half of the night into pieces you won't remember. And it's one of the most powerful suppressors we know of the dreaming stage, the stage that repairs your emotions and consolidates memory. Sedation isn't sleep. It's closer to mild anesthesia. And here's the piece the cybernetics lens makes obvious, and it's the so what for this entire account. Those inputs do not all pay out on the same schedule. Some are fast. Skip the late drink, cool the room, put the screen down. You may well feel that tomorrow morning. But the ones that matter most are slow. Rebuilding a circadian rhythm, holding a wake time, fixing your light exposure, those take days or weeks of consistency before the payoff shows up at all. And guess which ones people quit? Not the fast ones, the slow ones. Because they judged a slow system by a fast signal, saw nothing, and concluded it wasn't working. And that right there is the exact same error that destroys investors. Trying to force a fast outcome out of a slow feedback system. Panic selling the strategy the week before it pays. You don't command sleep and you don't command a portfolio. You control the inputs, you respect the delay, and you let it happen. So let me pull the three ledgers back together and then give the strongest version of the case against all of this. Here's the bear case, stated as fairly as I can. This is wellness content wearing a finance costume. And it's worse than that. The whole longevity space is full of grifters and people with terrible judgment, and even the popular sleep science has been challenged. Some of the scarier statistics that get thrown around have been disputed by other researchers. So why should a serious investor spend 40 minutes on eat your vegetables advice from a field this compromised? And honestly, a lot of that is fair. The space does have grifters. Some of the most cited popular claims have real critics, and I've deliberately leaned on the more contested ones as little as I can. That skepticism is healthy. Keep it. But there's a second objection that's harder, and I'd rather raise it myself than leave it sitting there. I've spent this whole episode telling you these accounts are controllable. Fix your lights, hold your wake time, do the sets, convert the surplus. And I also told you the World Health Organization calls night shift work probably carcinogenic. Sit with those two for a second. The people most exposed to that hazard are precisely the people who cannot choose their inputs. A nurse on rotating nights doesn't need blackout curtains. She needs a different roster. Someone working 2 jobs cannot fix their sleep account with a cooler bedroom. And a person with no surplus has no savings rate, no matter how disciplined they are. So let me be precise about what I'm actually claiming. These 3 accounts are controllable at the margin, and the margin is enormously wider for some people than for others. I'm talking to the person who has the margin and isn't using it. If that isn't you, then this episode is describing a constraint, not a failing, and I'd rather say that out loud than let you finish it, thinking the ledger was always yours to balance. But here's why the thesis survives it completely. The 3 accounts don't depend on any guru, any influencer, any single best-selling book, or any disputed statistic. Strip all of that away, and what's left is boring and rock solid. Government mortality tables, peer-reviewed muscle and metabolism studies, the World Health Organization's cancer classifications, decades of replicated sleep research. And the lens I'm asking you to use isn't a wellness lens at all. It's your lens. Compounding. Stock versus flow. Slow feedback, time, value, the exact discipline you already trust with your money. The argument was never trust these people. It was point the tools you already own at the assets you've been ignoring. So here's where it all lands. You are keeping 3 ledgers, whether you look at them or not. A cash account that funds the freedom to own your own time. A muscle account that funds your independence in the decades when it's hardest to build. And a sleep account, which isn't really an account at all. It's the upkeep that funds, quite literally, the repair work on the other 2, and that only ever gives you a partial refund on a night you skipped. All 3 are quiet, all 3 are invisible when they're working, and all 3, today's inputs set tomorrow's capacity. And all 3 punish the person who mistakes a slow signal for no signal at all. The loudest number in this market is $725 billion of capital chasing a machine that never sleeps. The quietest, and I'd argue the more important, is whatever's happening tonight in 3 accounts that never show up on any tape. It echoes something Max Weber recognized in The Ethic at the root of early capitalism, that durable results tend to come from disciplined, frugal, patient, unglamorous habits. That's the whole thing. Money in the market, time in the gym, eat well, sleep well, stay away from bad people, be a good one. 4 words on a coffee mug. Eat, sleep, gym, invest. It is almost stupidly simple. The hard part was never knowing what to do. The hard part is being the kind of patient that a slow feedback system rewards in a portfolio and in a life. Anyway, that's this week. If you're enjoying Conviction Bets, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, whatever you use. Leave a review if you have 30 seconds. It genuinely helps new listeners find the show. Until next time, stay patient, stay skeptical, and keep your eye on the quiet stuff. I'm JL Maurer. This has been Conviction Bets.